It is always good to have friends, but even better to have friends that share your passion for scale modeling. And in this case, Tim, also known as Tim Wings 500 Collector, has been a very good friend to me because he has borrowed me this aircraft model, which is quite interesting, but just never really fitted my collection, which is why I never bought it. But thanks to him, I can now show you this model because I think it is worth our time and perhaps even our money. And with that, hello and welcome to this new episode of Review, where we today will take a closer look at a Boeing 767-300ER of All Nippon Airways. At the front of the box, we have this lovely design with the rendition of the aircraft model, the Star Wars branding, the ANA branding, all that good stuff. That is basically also continued on the backside, where we again have the Star Wars and the ANA branding, but then also again have a rendition from the side and a top-down view of the aircraft model with a few specifications here on the original measurements. And then we get way more specifications here in this section. So overall, a really nice box design here from JC Wings. Now, before we get further into today's review, it is worth mentioning that this aircraft model does come with a stand. And here she is, the Boeing 767-300ER of All Nippon Airways, in short ANA, in their special R2D2 and BB8 Star Wars livery. The model from JC Wings, and they have actually produced quite a few of these Star Wars livery ANA models. They have, of course, also had like a 777, 300 and 200, and also a Dreamliner 7879, all with Star Wars themed liveries, and all of them looking really quite spectacular. One of the highlights, of course, is that they have added physical antennas in Scale 500, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's focus on the 767 for now and see what it actually offers collectors. And we start our tour around the aircraft model with a look at the tail section. Here we have the classic ANA branding on the vertical stabilizer. On the horizontal stabilizer, we actually also have a bit of nice printed detailing. Now, on the fuselage, then, we find quite a few details. We have a lovely marking above the cabin door. That's basically a ridge to move water away from the door. We, of course, have the R2D2 branding or writing and a depiction of R2D2 on one side of the livery, and on the other side we then have BB8 and the Star Wars branding in orange. Apart from more lovely detailing around the cabin door, we have the full registration code of the aircraft, the Japanese flag, and a bunch of hatches and markings. Really lovely stuff here. And we of course also have some detailing around the APU exhaust at the very tail of the aircraft. So a really quite impressive back end of the aircraft, and it keeps on giving here at the front, where we across the fuselage then of course have the Japanese flag and the ANA branding with the company slogan Inspiration of Japan. Next to that we then have the Star Wars billboard branding again, even with the copyright writing underneath that. We have a plethora of small markings and hatches and sensors here. That's really awesome. Again, this little line or ridge just above the cabin door, which also has a lovely amount of detailing. We have the Star Alliance logo, of which the airline is a founding member, and that leads us to the cockpit section, which is also pulling its weight here with a bunch of markings and sensors like the petro tubes, and of course also the cockpit windows with the metallic edges and the window wipers. Really overall fantastic work when it comes to the amount of printed details JC Wings has added to this aircraft model. But what about the engines? Now, the engine nacelles have been kept in this grey tone, but do have the silver leading edge printed on, as well as the General Electric logo. And while the real aircraft also doesn't really have any safety markings here, I think in terms of print there could have been added a little bit more overall, maybe some hatches or something like that. So compared to the fuselage, maybe a little bit underwhelming actually, but the physical detailing itself is okay. But we do see that it's not really a new mold when we look into the engines from the front, but we can see the engine fan blades. That looks good, but it is in a light metallic color. That should be a darker gray. On the fuselage, just above the wings, we find the emergency exits have been printed on, leading us straight on to the wings, which we should also take a closer look at. Starting over the top side, where we on one side find the Japanese sun or flag, and then on the other side we can see again here very lovely detailing in form of the flap slats and spoilers that have been carved out quite nicely. We have the markings as to where to walk on the wings. We have the full registration code of the aircraft, and of course also the safety markings for the emergency exits. That's really lovely detailing overall. And we also find again the Japanese sun or flag on the underside of the wing, as well as the full registration code, apart from some more nice physical detailing. My highlight on the wings, however, is the fact that we do have the landing lights as a printed detail. Now, just as we could see with the engine engines. Also, the landing gear reveals that this is not the newest of molds that JC Wings has used. The landing gear looks overall fine, but it is not nearly as refined as maybe more modern molds would offer us. But we do still have some fair amount of detailing, although what does surprise me is that we don't have any printed details here at the front landing gear, except if we look underneath, then we do find some printed detailing. Now, on the belly of the aircraft, apart from some lovely amount of printed detailing, we do have a hole in the fuselage. As we have established, there is a stand included with this aircraft model. However, I have tried it out and it doesn't really fit. You would have to use quite excessive force to be able to slot it in, more than I wanted to do for this review for sure. Unfortunately, we do also here see maybe a little bit the Achilles heel of this aircraft model in terms of its age, because what we do see here is how the wings have been slotted in as a single piece from underneath. That leaves these quite ugly gaps. But yeah, as I briefly mentioned before, it is a fairly old mold, but I will talk more about that later in the video. What is really very lovely is when we look at the fuselage from above, because that reveals a lovely combination of printed and physical detailing in form of antennas. Some printed, some actually as physical antennas. That is very unique for Scale 500. There are not very many models, and only JC Wings models that so far have done that. And of course, we also have a set dome. So really, as I said, a lovely combination here of physical and printed detailing. And then last but not least, we do also have the doors to the cargo compartments, also here with a lovely amount of detailing here at the back of the aircraft and also here at the front of the aircraft. So there we have it, the Boeing 767-300ER in the special Star Wars R2D2 and BB8 livery of ANA from JC Wings in scale 1 to 500. And what can we say about this aircraft model? Now, on first impression, I would be tempted to say that JC Wings has gone all in on this aircraft model and really delivered the best of the best. And first impressions are important, but they are not always right. Because if we dig a little bit into this model, then we start noticing a few things here and there. But that's not to take away from the overall achievement, because what we have here is a very good Scale 500 aircraft model with some very unique features. JC Wings has certainly put a lot of effort into this model in terms of adding as many printed details as possible, but there are also some curious things which I don't quite understand. While, as I mentioned, the real aircraft, for example, doesn't really have any safety markings, or at least no visible safety markings from images on the engines, I still think they could have put a little bit more effort into the printed detailing of those. And which is also strange is, for example, the missing markings around the front landing gear on the side. That makes very little sense when you see so many other printed details on the aircraft model. But of course, if we look at the bigger picture, since we have so many printed details, it is more easily forgiven that they then maybe have skipped out on one or two minor details here and there. Now, according to the model aircraft database, this 767 was released in 2021, together actually with the Dreamliner, also from JC Wings, which also features R2D2 on it. Now, of course, the mold itself is not from 2021, not nearly. This is a much, much older mold. And that makes sense since JC Wings before and certainly not after have released any other 767 Scale 500 aircraft models, so an investment in an entirely new mold would not have made any sense. So what they did was they took a very, very old mold, most likely the one from Sky 500, and then they slightly tweaked it. So they did put in some investment, some effort here, because they did, of course, add to the physical antennas, but that didn't overall modify or renew this mold. So yeah, we are left with this kind of hybrid, very old mold with a few new things here and there. As I said, it makes economical sense from JC Wings' point of view, but as a collector, it's a little bit of a shame because there are some places where it really does show its age with, for example, the landing gear or the wings and the engines. For some reason, back in the day, they just had this light metallic color inside the engines instead of the darker gray tone, which would be correct. And they have, of course, gone all in with the printed detailing, even though they skipped out on a few minor details. But as I said, with that much detailing, leaving one or two things away, I don't think it really hurts the model overall. So I do really understand any collector who back in the day went for this aircraft model, and I do most certainly also understand any collector who today is looking for it. So thank you very much, Tim Wings 500 Collector, for borrowing me this aircraft model so I could show you this, because I do think this is a highlight in the Scale 500 world for sure. And with that, we have reached the end of today's episode. If you have enjoyed this video, then feel free to leave a like. If you are new around here, why not hit subscribe? And with that, thanks so much for watching. Hope to see you soon again. I'm checking out, and bye.